Moving on to the morality of, and this, as we delve into these different articles here, this being Article 4, this really is where the rubber hits the road. This is really about the teachings of the church, Christ's teachings as interpreted by the church, that shows where does morality come from? You know, we look around in the world, and my own children, you know, I'm a catechist, so they don't go to church. You know, the plumber's sink is always backed up, and the auto mechanic's car is always up on blocks. Well, I'm a catechist. My kids don't go to church. But, you know, Mom, there's all kinds of good people. They don't go to church. You know, look at Bill and Melinda Gates, how charitable they are and how much giving they do and all this money and so on. And they're not Catholic. What's the problem? I got some work to do there when they let me talk. But the point is, our morality springs from somewhere. You know, we're not just born knowing good from evil and so on. But if you look at section 1750, the morality of human acts depends on the object chosen, what is it that I want to do, the end in view or the intention, the circumstances of the action, those three things. So the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Oh, Mom, I meant to do those dishes. Oh, I meant to clean out the litter. Oh, I meant to take the trash out. My mom would always say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I just stopped saying anything because I knew what she was going to counter with. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's not what you meant to do, Barb. It's what you were required to do and didn't do. So if you go into the next few paragraphs, it really explains what the object chosen, what that is. It's the good toward which the will deliberately directs itself. It goes into the circumstances, including the consequences. And I heard somebody say earlier when we were talking, when you had your breakout session after Todd's discussion and a little bit after mine, that there's no responsibility anymore. You know, nobody takes responsibility or feels accountable for what they've done or not done. You watch any crime shows where there's, I mean, true crime, you know, like, I don't remember the names of them, but I know they're on some true crime channels where they have the courtroom appearance where the perpetrator is sentenced and so on, and he gets to allocute to what he did, or, you know, do you have any, you know, final words? Yes, I'd like to speak. Really sorry for what happened to your daughter. I'm really sorry what happened to your son. You know, rape and murder, I did it. I'm sorry, I need to clean up my act. I'm going to prison to do just that. Nobody ever says, it's just, I'm sorry for what happened. It didn't just drop out of the sky that your daughter was raped and murdered and your son was killed in an automobile. You know, there's no accountability more. I want the judge to say, stop right there. Say that you're sorry for what you did. Nobody wants to hear that, except the victim's family. And this is exactly what it's talking about. The circumstances, including the consequences, are the secondary elements of a moral act that contribute to increasing or diminishing the moral goodness or evil of a human act. For example, the amount of a theft. It's a poor country, barely support your family. Maybe a hurricane or a typhoon just swept through. You steal a loaf of bread to feed your family. Is that a big sin? No, because the greater good was to keep your family alive. Life always matters. On the other hand, I steal a Ferrari because I want to have a good life running around. It's about me, it's about the amount. And it really isn't a question, it's not proportionalism. But when God looks at something like that, he looks at it differently than if this person just stole the Ferrari. Okay, so there's a discussion of that in those sections. If we go to 1755, morally good act requires the goodness of the object. The object of the choice by itself can vitiate an act in its entirety. And this is where we say abortion is always and everywhere wrong. This is where that comes from. There are some concrete acts such as fornication, adultery, abortion, that it is always wrong to choose, because choosing them entails a disorder of the will that is a moral evil. That's it in a nutshell. 1756, it is therefore an error to judge the morality of human acts by considering only the intention that inspires them or the circumstances, environment, social pressure, duress, emergency, which supply their context. There are acts which, in and of themselves, independently of circumstances and intentions, are always gravely illicit by reason of their objects, such as blasphemy, perjury, murder, adultery. One may not do evil so that good may result from it. And I just recently, I would say probably in the last 6 months, I don't remember what I was reading, a blog maybe, and I saw a quote from Socrates that said, "One may not do evil to accomplish good." It's like, oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that's where that came from, but there it is. Let's look at the morality of the passions, okay, our passions, our feelings, if you will. If you look at 1763, the term passion belongs to Christian patrimony. Feelings or passions are emotions or movements of the sensitive appetite that incline us to act or not act in regard to something felt or imagined to be good or evil. The whole section on the passions basically tell us that passions rise and fall. They're independent. They're neither good nor bad, but they cause us to move in one direction or another. If you look at 1767, in themselves, passions are neither good nor evil. They are morally qualified only to the extent that they effectively engage reason and will. Okay? 1768, strong feelings are not decisive for the morality or holiness of persons. They are simply the inexhaustible reservoir of images and affections in which the moral life is expressed. The end of that paragraph, emotions and feelings can be taken up to virtues or perverted by vices. So, you know, people tell me, oh, I go to church because it just feels so good, or I go to reconciliation, I feel so good afterwards. What happens when you stop feeling good? What happens when it becomes habit? It's not about the feelings. We make a decision based on reason and faith and say, I will or I won't. Okay? Not saying that there's anything wrong with emotions at all. They're just simply neutral. But we can't base our moral judgments on whether it feels right to do, because, you know, the devil can pervert that. He can say, oh, look over here. Doesn't this look like a, hey, I've been there. It's a dead end. It's no place to go. Take a look at your, if you find you're really getting bogged down with all these different paragraphs, and, you know, there's a lot of elucidation in here. I'm sure you told them, I don't know if you've addressed the Catechism before, Todd, but those in brief sections are outstanding. They're really good for at least giving you kind of a kickoff, you know, and then maybe you find yourself going back and reading a little bit more about it. Moving into conscience, this is crucial. We've got to talk about conscience. Conscience is not the little white angel over here or the little red devil that you saw in cartoons when you were growing up. And still, to this day, every once in a while, I'll see a cartoon and I think, they still have that. That's not it. The conscience, and the moral conscience, if you look at paragraph 1776, which comes from Gaudium et Spes. I can't even remember what the English, I always say Gaudium et Spes. Joy and hope. I should know that from my Latin days. Deep within his conscience, man discovers a law which he has not laid upon himself, but which he must obey. Its voice, ever calling to him in love and do what is good and avoid evil, sounds in his heart at the right moment. For man has in his heart a law inscribed by God. That's all men, Christian or not. His conscience is man's most secret core and his sanctuary. There he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his depths. But you have to pay attention to him. He whispers. That's the problem, I think, one of the problems with our young people. They can't hear God. Their worlds are so, and ours too really, are so staticky. There's so much static around them, they can't hear him. So when he speaks in their heart, he can't hear them. We wonder why there's fewer and fewer vocations. They can't hear God's call to the priesthood or religious life. They can't hear God's call. The world is too loud. We continue to go back to the dignity of the human person, the fact that we've been made in the image and likeness of God. If you look at paragraph 1780, the dignity of the human person implies and requires uprightness of moral conscience. Conscience includes the perceptions of the principles of morality. Their application is in the given circumstances by the practical discernment of reasons and goods, and finally judgment about concrete acts yet to be performed are already performed. Now we go on to the formation of conscience. There has recently, and I think it's coming to an end, but it's still with us, a period in the church where certain decisions, primarily made about whether or not you're married in the church, and whether or not after divorce you can remarry, was given over to what was called the internal forum. Unfortunately, the internal forum was never explained, was never taught, was never understood clearly by many clergy, and so as a result we've got a lot of divorced and remarried Catholics running around going to our churches, receiving the sacraments that probably need to get that squared away. Formation of conscience played a big part in that. Basically what they said, that, and I know a couple of priests back up north that said this, if you really believe in your heart that you were not married the first time, and you can clear that, and you can square that with God, then you can remarry. Wow, that's a terrific burden to lay on a couple's shoulders without a well-formed conscience. So what is a well-formed conscience? It must be informed and moral judgment enlightened. Okay, what does that mean? It means that the education of the conscience is a lifelong task from the earliest years that awakens the child to the knowledge and practice of the interior law recognized by conscience. Prudent education teaches virtue. Is that being done in our homes today? Maybe our homes, but really, around the globe? Prudent education teaches virtue. It prevents or cures fear, selfishness and pride, resentment arising from guilt, and feelings of complacency born of human weakness and faults. The education of the conscience guarantees freedom and engenders peace of heart. Consciences are not being formed. It needs to start when they're very, very young. There are rules, certainly the law of God, but if you look at 1789, there are rules that apply in every case when it comes to forming conscience. May never do evil, so that good may result. The golden rule, of course, whatsoever you would like to have done to you, do to them. And then charity always proceeds by way of respect for one's neighbor and conscience. The Catechism also goes into what it means to act against your conscience. Unfortunately, and there are people, and I hear them even in public life say, well, I can't vote against my conscience, no, I have to vote for choice, for women to be able to have abortions, for contraception in our healthcare Act. Okay, that's not a well-formed conscience. But they say I can't act against my conscience. If their conscience were well-formed, they would never even say that. The formation of conscience is absolutely crucial. If you look at the in brief section, 1800, 1801, and 1802, 1800 says, a human being must always obey the certain judgment of his conscience. You can't have a certain judgment without a well-formed conscience. Conscience can remain in ignorance or make erroneous judgments. Such ignorance and errors are not always free from guilt. And finally, the Word of God is a light for our path. We must assimilate it in faith and prayer and put it into practice. This is how moral conscience is formed.